table. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I think this might be session number 48 of Mahamudra for the People. And I was hoping that maybe we could spend a little bit of time just in meditation, allowing ourselves time to stabilize the experience of mind and go a little deeply into that. But before we do, I'd just like to kind of bring to mind, and I know that this is, I'm not the only person who noticed this, but, Ukraine was invaded. And there are, just a lot of people in many different ways who are going through a hard time, not just in Ukraine, but neighboring areas in Europe, folks here. I was reading last night as I was falling asleep, maybe about 157 people were killed, the first day of the invasion. And so just taking a little bit of time to dedicate any intention around our practice towards everybody, not just those who were killed, in the conflict in Ukraine, the invasion, just everybody who's passing through the Bardo right now. Everybody who is mourning somebody who has lost, they've lost. Anybody who has been in pain. And just coming back to this very basic recognition of why it is that we practice, ultimately to allow ourselves to be able to access an experience of the nature of mind, to be able to give birth to a view of compassionate resolve, to be able to benefit all beings, no matter how limited we may feel at any moment of time. Just keeping in mind everybody who is suffering, not just in Ukraine, but around the world. And maybe we could sit for about 20 minutes to begin. I'm not in my usual place in the apartment. My kids are home for the week, so it's a little tight. So I don't have a bell or anything here, but I'll just speak up maybe in about 10 minutes time. So allow yourself to rest in a meditative position as comfortably as possible. Because we're practicing Mahamudra, depending on your relative experience with the practice, allow yourself to anchor the mind through one of a number of ways, one of which is to focus on the breath, a light awareness of inhalation, exhalation, the felt sense thereof. Another method is to gently focus your gaze on a physical object in your field of visual consciousness. Likewise, you could do a visualized object, perhaps a Buddha image on the crown of one's head, or a tigle drop right between the brow, on the brow between your eyes, or a tigle at the navel. And of course, allowing ourselves to just experience mind itself as the anchor, just gently sitting like this for 20 minutes. And just gently allow yourself to come into relationship with everyone here, being here. Take a little bit of time to just notice what that was like for yourself. Okay. So I did want to see if anybody had any questions from last week or just in general before we start. And yeah, folks want to just raise their hand or yeah, I know, Melissa.
Yeah, I want to bring this up because I think it might be beneficial for the group. I really want to apologize. Last week I got very pissy and I got triggered, and it wasn't anything Lama Rape or anybody in the group did. It just happens. And I'm a trauma victim, and a lot of times group dynamics are really hard and trigger me to the point where sometimes I think maybe I should just watch recordings. Again, it's not any particular person here, and a lot of people in the Sangha have been through what I've been through. Sometimes I think there should be, Mahamudra for the traumatized. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that for trauma victims, there weren't boundaries. And so I do really well with healthy boundaries. And Lama Repa is the first American teacher I've had. And the Tibetans I've studied with, the rituals to me are healthy boundaries. And I think that's a difficult issue. And the other thing is, Lama Ripa was talking about definitions, and I'm a poet, and I'm really into the root of words and etymology. I even look up the etymology of Sanskrit words and stuff. And I realized it's true, Lama Ripa, what you were saying is that there was a part of me that was trying to pin down definitions to feel safe. And again, I'm bringing this up because it might be helpful for the group. And that my practice was feeling groovy. I was sort of hiding in my practice, feeling groovy. I didn't want it disrupted. And that's really the antithesis of what Mahamudra is about. So one question I had about definitions, and Payne and I were talking a lot about language in the chat, is one thing I said in the chat last week is, from what I've read and from teachers I've had, sometimes these definitions make more sense if you've accomplished what they're talking about. And I do find some of the text very poetic, and I love that. But I wanted to ask Lama Repa, how do we take these descriptions? You had called them a blueprint. I feel they're necessary, but I think I'm taking them too seriously and too literally in order to feel safe or in order to pin down my meditation. And so do we just have a light touch with these definitions? Do we say to ourselves, well, maybe in the future, if I realize something, they'll be helpful? So how do we take those definitions that Payne and I were asking so much about?
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. The first thing I just want to say is, thank you. And yeah, I also apologize on my end if there was also a little bit of a lag, it seemed, with Crowdcast. So anyway, I apologize if there was any confusion, created by me. This is a really lovely question and really timely. I happened to be talking with one of my teachers last night about a particular text, and they were saying, it's probably a better idea for us to translate this thing together or with a very small group of people, so that we can use our own definitions and have our own translation. And so even like, let's say you take Flight of the Garuda, for example, there's the Eric Pemakunzong translation, there's the Keith Diamond translation. And really, like, I would, as a thought experiment, there's this great program called Tibetan Translation Tool. which you can use to it's basically a series of, like a database, series of dictionaries. um, Look at what it's like to translate even just like the refuge prayer. And when we begin to get that experience, we see that there is not a kind of very literal word for word at all translation process from Tibetan into English, and then also the other way around. And that it's helpful to kind of keep that in mind, because there was this recent like video teaching with Bob Thurman on kind of like a little bit of a book thing for his new book, but he talked about the translation of the term. I wrote it down when he said it, like Mahasandhi or Dzogchen, often translated as the great perfection, and he was like, actually, I think the more accurate translation is the great connection. About how everything is fundamentally connected. And so this is to say that the terms we use may be in constant transition. And this is the weird part of it, is like, the nature of mind and the experience of the nature of mind is one thing, right? But then the terminology used to describe its characteristics is complex, and maybe a little bit like trying to take a picture of a bird flying in the sky. You might get a snap, you'll get an image, but will you get the whole definitive thing? Maybe not. My root teacher taught herself Tibetan. She was Sikkimese and didn't grow up speaking Tibetan, and she used the 6-hour Mahakala sadhana as a way of, she sat down to translate each and every word, and learned Tibetan that way. And I was talking with Dr. Nita a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that even with some Ati Yoga texts, the kind of language that's used, there's the poetic language, but then there's also kind of a very informal kind of vernacular style that is not necessarily poetic in nature, but very direct, and tends to be the kind of language that is very hard for people with training in classical Tibetan to fully get, because there's a lot of local, like for example, Amdo dialect aspects of the language that maybe somebody from Kham might not get. So it would, all of this is a very long-winded way of saying that it would be, there should hopefully be numerous translations of many different texts coming from many different vantage points, because this is not the kind of thing where there is just one definitive translation, or like a scientific kind of here you go. I've translated a few things, and while it's a fun process, once you get into that murky like, wow, this sentence could go this way or that way, and the tonality in these divergent ways is different enough that I need to, like, go ring somebody in India for some advice on making sure that I don't do something lead even myself, like, in the wrong direction. Yeah, it's tough depending on the nature of usually the subject matter, right? There's things that are more poetic in nature, and then especially something like Heart of the Matter, or any similar text, where the simplicity of the text itself and the mindset of the person who has written the composition, in this particular case, Tselyeneltse Gwangjo, has to be kept in mind too, because we could be a very wordy intellectual person, and then if we're engaging in this like tone, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is the tone of the author, right? And How do you know this? You know this from really getting to know their work. So it's not to say it all doesn't matter, but again, how we've been trained, you know, and our point of orientation tends to come through in the translation as well. That's helpful. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Yeah, Payne, thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah.
I just wanted to say, in the spirit of translating our experiences directly, what you're saying there about not getting hung up on your journey with the words, taking my experience, don't rubberneck words or crash. See them, let them go. See them, let them go. Oh, pretty mountain, let it go. So like, yeah. And I think what you said, did you mean the Tibetan Himalayan library, the thing with all the dictionaries? That's all I had to say.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, Anita.
I'm very appreciative of the conversation around definitions, because it is something that I've been thinking about. I've noticed that, I'm learning Mahamudra from you, Bhakti Yoga from you, Cha from you, and I'm noticing that the boundaries between these various practices are getting a little blurry, and I'm not sometimes fully sure what I'm practicing. On one hand, I feel more relaxed and less stressed about what it is I'm doing, but then I also get worried about, well, if I don't know what it is I'm doing, how do I increase my practice? So I'm just curious what you think about that.
Yeah, no, this is another lovely question. Yeah, again, a lot of this has to do with, in this particular case, like, my point of orientation. So, like, for example, you can take Mahamudra or Hatha Yoga, for example. So basically, non-conceptual meditation, and apply it to everything, right? So in this particular case, then Cha, which is this very focused and defined practice of generally speaking, offering one's own body to it could be a number of different things, right? So ghosts, demons, attachment. We end up in this kind of practice offering depending on the text, a visualized form of our body chopped up into pieces. Some texts are very kind of gory, others are a little bit more cleaned up. But at its root, right, is the severance of identity, right? Severance. So when we remove point of orientation, what remains, right? So visualizing myself, chopped up into pieces and offered into a, in a kapala, skull cup, and then that is then offered to ghosts and demons that cause harm and sickness and rage and depression and all of these things. And really feeling into it and feeling the ways that, maybe I might cling to the body, cling to identity, might experience fear, might experience anxiety, might have actually a little bit of a kind of somatic response, then kind of resting directly into that to be able to see and experience what is there. Right? And of course, there's nothing there. Right? There is no self. Right? Is kind of like what the goal point is, right? And so as a result, and so Cha is that way. Yidam practice so the practice of a deity, right? It could be Vajrayogini, it could be medicine Buddha, it could be Tara, it could be Chenrezi, wrathful, compassionate, in between, semi-wrathful. But even there, right, the generation of oneself in the form of a deity, really taking time to settle into that experience, right? The understanding that location is not just, my bedroom or our bedroom here in Brooklyn, but it is at the center of a pure land, right? And that all sound is the sound of the mandala of the deity, and that our mind experience is not necessarily this kind of very self-oriented, in my particular case, right, Justin-oriented locus, but actually vast, expansive, spacious awareness, right? And so resting into that, my arms, I feel like I need to be stretched. Resting into that allows us then to be able to begin to touch into experiencing lack of self, And then of course Mahamudra and Dzogchen, because they're non-conceptual in nature, it's like a little bit more of a fast mirror hold up, so either like a mirror that we hold up and we're like, oh, there's nothing there, or we look directly into the experience of mind, and after some time of you could say like exercising in our practice a little bit so that there's stability, then resting into the direct experience of what is there, right? And the felt sense of spacious, non-dual spacious, awareness. So even Tonglen, right? So something, which is, there's there can be visualization, there doesn't need to be, but this, giving, sending the, love, compassion, the desire for beings to be free of discomfort, anxiety, pain, etc. Taking on all of the hardships, pain, the suffering, and continuing to do this. After a while, right, then we begin to realize that there is, at the very best, a hair's breadth of separation between ourselves and others, right, which is kind of the contemplative function of a practice like that. So everything, begins to lead us in that direction. And so that's why sometimes these things can look like they are moving in a way towards the same thing. And it depends on like how we want to conceive of practice too. Like, are these separate practices, or is this all big D Dharma? And there's not a right answer for that. As per each one of us, but we may have different kind of needs, right? There's that. If our mind happens to be a mind that's lovely, right, and very analytical, then it can be helpful to like have different practices for different things. I think at some point though, it could be helpful to drive all, so like there's this Lojong slogan, like drive all blames into one, right? Which is like, drive all blames into one, to myself, right? Myself that gets it wrong all the time, my identity, which is true. I get it wrong all the time. I'm definitely not, perfect. Just as much as we can blame drive all blames into one, right? We can drive all practice into one, right? And so what that means is driving all practice into a tonality or an approach that's able to kind of touch on everything, right? And relationship to Mahamudra and Hatha Yoga is a really lovely way of being able to do that, where even if we would say, oh, look, I've got 5 minutes between things. I'm going to do like a really informal practice and just sit and relax, stabilize my body, relax, my gaze, and rest my mind and sit. That could be Mahamudra, that could be Dzogchen. That's the nature of mind. We could arise in the form of Avalokiteshvara and Duchen, recital Mani Padme and rest in that same way if we want, But if it feels better to almost like have like a big wall of Dharma made up of all these bricks of different component practices, that's fine too. There's no hard fast rule. And again, we're all very different, right? What brings us comfort in the practice of Dharma is different. What brings us stability in the practice of Dharma is different. I think I'm a little bit a product of my teachers, so that's kind of where they've gone. I remember Boku Rinpoche, when he was alive, my best friend and armor brother, he was, we were there together, and his parents came to visit, and Boku Rinpoche did a lot of Tara practice, and there's this really lovely big white statue of white Tara, in his room. And so we brought my friend Eric's parents to see Rinpoche, and Eric's mom was like, "Oh, who's that?" Like pointing at the Tara statue, and Boku Rinpoche was like, "Oh, that's Mahamudra." And she was just, she's not a practitioner, so she was just like, "Oh, what's that?" But he looked at Eric and I, were like, "Oh, okay, thank you, Rinpoche, for that instruction." So actually your question in a way is very similarly related to Melissa's, in the sense that how we approach all these practices is a form of our own expression and languaging around Dharma as well, right? And again, the words we choose to use, the manner in which we choose to speak, the implications of all of those things. There's nothing, there's nothing wrong with, even if you take Vajrayana, and I don't mean to talk so much, but if you take Vajrayana more broadly, right? And you look at all of the different schools, the 4 major schools, and all of the sub schools, you will see that there are like straight up conflicts, in terms of view, oh no, it can't be like that. It has to be like this. And we can kind of, sit on the sidelines and scratch our heads and be like, who's right? Right. And that question is probably the wrong question to ask, right? Because it's all about, the kind of uncomfortable irony that a lot of the meaning in that there is not a definitive one true meaning. This is what kind of differentiates sometimes the view that we find in the Buddhist tradition from a more like Abrahamic position, where there is like, a much more kind of tends to be perhaps a much more clear idea of what the actual truth is, right? Whereas in the Buddhist tradition, it tends to be a little bit more lived, and therefore, maybe a little bit more individual at times. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, well, if there is, please just, it's so much easier with Zoom. I can see people. You can literally raise your hand. You can go like this. You can, write in the text box. With the crowdcast, I could only see myself, which got boring. So I think I'm just going to kind of go over a couple pages of this, and then we can see if there are questions, and just allow yourself to listen in. Yes, yeah. Thank you, Kim. So Saraha. So this is approximately where we left out. I think I'm overlapping. I'm going back. I think one or two stanzas. So Saraha in this text, and this is Silly Natsa Guangzhou's Heart of the Matter, which is a very beautiful text. So he points out that Saraha, the great Brahmin, early progenitor of Mahamudra tradition, says that those who don't drink their fill from the cool and soothing nectar of their master's oral instructions will only be tortured by thirst on the desert plains of countless treatises. And so within the context of the statement actually refers to, through the direct experience of one's teacher and receiving instruction from one's teacher, that is how, that is more meaningful sometimes than going back to countless treatises of Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, etc. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but again, kind of vibing a little bit off of Anita and Melissa's questions, this piece about individual experience, right, is really kind of, that's where the juice or the meat or the bones, depending on what you like to eat, maybe with respect to truly understanding the nature of mind. He goes on to say, for this reason, it is essential not to pursue or cling to views proven only by words, but to personally begin training in the view and meditation of the lineage of profound meaning. So again, oh yeah, we are now on page 28, top of page 28. So again, pretty self-explanatory that words are one thing. And so these terms like vast, right? Spacious, awareness. And so we'll hear a vast, spacious awareness. And that's one thing, right? And then it becomes another thing to be able to begin to feel into what is the vastness of mind like. How is spacious awareness able to be, how do I connect to it? Right? What is the quality of spaciousness? How does that show up, so to speak? Right, and then what even what even is meant by awareness, right? So use the term rigpa. Sometimes that gets thrown about so much that we're like, well, it kind of doesn't mean anything. So again, feeling directly into the mind's, even when I say the mind's ability to know itself, what does that mean? So we could kind of keep going and keep going and keep going, and it doesn't mean that we're obviously not intelligent, but what it means is learning how to really parse out the felt experience word by word, bit by bit, right? So that somebody will say, oh, the mind is like this, and we may have experienced it and can understand, or we may have almost experienced it, and that instruction will actually kind of push us to greater understanding. But what is important is that it seems to be and I don't know if anybody here has experienced this, but raise your hand if you have, actually, like where the wily snake of self will try to skirt out of allowing ourselves to necessarily, the words begin to lose their meaning. So if you come back, and this is even like, so with the meditation instruction, we can come back to it and come back to it and come back to it, right? And after a while, sometimes there, it is almost as if there is a part of the self, part of like ego clinging, that pushes us to be able to no longer connect to the kind of vast freshness that is beyond it, you know. And it's not that there's an actual battle going on, but again, you know, this is like the power of habit and the power of clinging to the same approach, needing clinging to clarity, clinging to normalcy, clinging to stability, which is why, like in these traditions, there are all these crazy stories of people like, you know, then he picked up his shoe and hit so and so in the head. Or there's one story of a teacher. One of her students came to see her and asked for a blessing, and she urinated on his hands, and that shock, you know, that kind of very unexpected blessing was the thing that kind of, you know, caused this person to cease, you know, all cognitive, you know, functioning in that moment, and they were able to have a glimpse of, you know, Rigpa, right? Now, I don't know anybody who could skillfully do that these days. And obviously that kind of teaching is not necessarily, it gets romanticized, but it's an example of how helpful it can be to kind of be slightly jarred, you know, into an experience of freshness. The Zen tradition has all sorts of things, like, and Eric could probably speak much more to this than I could, given his Zen training. But this whole, you know, instruction of like, you know, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill them, and the person's like, what? Like, well, kill the Buddha? That's, you know, and it's that freshness. Or I'm a lot less familiar with, you know, the specifics of these things in the Zen or Chan traditions, but they are very fascinating. You know, as a parallel kind of pedagogic tool. So he goes on to say, you may wonder if the prelude to meditation, the various ways of seeking the mind, isn't a conceptualized form of analysis. Well, it isn't, since its source, dwelling and disappearance, are realized through the knowledge resulting from meditation. By your master's blessings and with your mind's composure, and it is not the pursuit of shifting intellect, right? So, you know, this also gets a little dicey too, I think, in the Western context. This idea of, you know, the master's blessing. Master's blessing is you know, that also becomes a little hard to know what that means, right? Because we'll read it and then, oh, you know, it's the blessings of the guru, you know, that will cause non-dual realization to arise. And so in the context of Guru Yoga, and you know, Guru Yoga is a really profound practice for both Mahamudra and Dzogchen. And why this is the case is not that, you know, necessarily that it is the direct blessing of the direct guru that allows your mind to open up. It's much more the case that the process of opening up to trusting into the enlightened nature of our own mind is the thing that causes, you know, it's got this kind of self-propagation to it, where when we're able to, so if it's Guru Rinpoche or Yoshe Tsogyal or Milarepa or Yutok, or it could be Sakya Pandita, it could be, you know, Jonang Karnata, it could be Joel Menmo, it could be Sukha Siddhi, right? Any of these, you know, it could be Buddhas, right? It could be Tara, it could be Medicine Buddha, right? But visualizing them, for example, above the crown of your head and taking time to really rest into the fact that we are able to have a relationship to this vast, profound, spacious compassion. and that vast, profound, spacious compassion is nothing other than our own mind stream. That this process of slowly opening up to that, this process of allowing ourselves to receive the blessings of that, has a way of soothing us. It has a way of relaxing us. It has a way of easing us out of these very hard places, right? Hard cognitive places, intellectual places of needing to know, often needing to control, needing to capture, needing to define, so that we're able to just kind of rest very freely and loosely into an experience of direct presence. And in that experience of direct presence, then we tend to be able to be more able to open up to the experience of mind itself. And so it's not necessarily that you need to, go find some guru somewhere to hit you with a shoe or pee on your hand. You can visualize, Manjushri above the crown of your head, or Karmapa, or any of the wonderful Sakya Trizin, or his sons, or his sister, or anybody, Yangtze Dujin Rinpoche, Yeshe Tsogyal, etc. And the fact that there's so many is also like an amazing thing too. But it's almost as if the Vajrayana tradition is just about not to be militaristic, but like shock and awe, just like, I don't know if anyone remembers the first Gulf War with like shock and awe, right? Like, so it's like Vajrayana is like shock and awe. It doesn't give you any place to hold on. The Rinpoche, Yeshe Tsogyal, Vimalamitra, etc. It's going and going. Jetsun Ningpo, all of these beings are our mind, right? And so opening up in this way to that is a much different felt experience than just engaging this from the perspective of shifting intellect. And so he goes on to say the dry theory of conceptualizing through endless speculations and lists of contradictions is in no way equal to seeing the nature of your mind. So trying to think, there are all these great books that have like, like Tibetan concept, Tibetan word, Sanskrit word, Pali word, and there are endless of those, and then they can be awesome. And, that is wonderful information and it's useful information, but that is not the same thing as cultivating vast open awareness, right? Self-reflexive, the self-reflexive quality of the mind to be able to know itself. And so then he goes on to say, well, you may now wonder, what is the actual view of seeing your own nature through the traditions of these profound paths? On the top of page 29. The middle way, the unity of the two truths beyond limitations, Mahamudra, the basic wakefulness of the uncontrived natural state, and the great perfection, the original Samantabhadra of primordial purity, are all in agreement on a single identical meaning. This mind that is present in all beings is in essence an original emptiness, not made out of anything whatsoever. By nature, it is unimpeded experience, aware and cognizant. Their unity, unfathomable by the intellect, defies such attributes as being present, absent, existent or non-existent, permanent or nothingness. And so this is the nature of our mind, right? The mind that is present in all beings is in essence an original emptiness, not made of anything whatsoever, right? So it's uncompounded. By nature, it is unimpeded experience. So it is unimpeded, right? This is, a kind of parallel explanation around the vastness. Aware and cognizant. And so the unity of all of these things is unfathomable by the intellect. It defies such attributes as being present or absent, existent or non-existent, permanent or nothingness. Right. So this is the nature of our mind, and so Tsili Natsuk Rungjo is basically pointing out, like, this could be really hard for logicians, or etymologists to be able to pin down, right? And now I'm definitely not going to steal away any joy that an etymologist might have around trying to do that. That sounds like a great challenge. But for somebody whose main focus is meditation, right, and the desire to actually experience this for oneself, relying on that kind of approach doesn't help. And just a little example of like the kind of person that Tsai Natsuk Rongjo was. So he was vegetarian, which is a little not necessarily the most unique, with like Tibetan yogis, Nakpas, but the one of the characteristics of his students were that if you took teachings from him, specific teachings, you had to vow to walk, only travel by walking. And so not that long ago, I was with somebody who was like, would you like I don't know, they were being a little kind, and they were like, oh, what kind of instruction would you like? And I was like, oh, how about one from Tsai Natsuk Rongjo? And they're like, well, then you're gonna have to walk home, and it was very far away from home. So I was like, oh, I can't do that. So and that's an important aspect of his tradition, though, because this comes back to his ethos, right? There's a very basic simplicity. If you want to know the nature of mind, then you need to sit and practice and distill that. Right? And this is, his way of practicing was, I think, a little on the hardcore side, so to speak. And so, luckily, I was warned, because otherwise I would still be walking home. So then he goes on, and I'll finish this little section, which is just one side of a page, and then maybe we can see if there are any questions, and then do a little meditation. He continues by saying, spontaneously present since the beginning, yet not created by anyone, this self-existing, self-manifesting natural awareness, or basic state, has a variety of different names. In the Prajnaparamita vehicle, it is called innate truth. The vehicle of mantra calls it natural luminosity. While a sentient being, it is named Sujatagarbha. During the path, it is given names which describe the view, meditation, and so forth. At the point of fruition, it is named Dharmakaya of Buddhahood. All these different names and classifications are nothing other than this present ordinary mind. So in a way, it's it's what you want it to be, which is I find funny, but it is in and of itself a constant reflection. It's often the reflection of the person trying to experience it, right? It is its inherent awakening is present from the very beginning, but we can't always see that because it's very hard for us to be able to recognize our own inherent awakening, let alone the inherent awakening of others. It is clear, there is no heaviness to it, right? There is no, it's spacious, it's vast, it's luminous, it's Buddha nature, it's Sujatagarbha, it's primordial purity, it's full and it's empty. It's, as large as the universe, and it is as small as we can conceive the smallest thing. You know, it is everything. So in the interest of, you know, checking in to see if people have any questions, maybe I'll pause here. Dog this here. Does anyone have any questions? It's Friday afternoon, at least here. Yeah.
Hello, Lama Justin.
Hi.
Thank you. My question is, I remember hearing about these kind of 4 ways you can sort of not quite get it, sort of. One of them being like, oh, it's too simple, and you sort of think it could be something really big or something like that. And maybe you've gone over this in other classes, and I'm just wondering about, you know, how to work with that sense of doubt that comes up when you feel you're sort of there, when you feel you're kind of resting, and you're like, but could this, but, you know, how to relate with that or integrate that. I'm curious about.
Yeah, thank you. And I really want to highlight, you said a super magical word, integration. Like it's a really important word. And the question itself is also really good. So this, a couple things. I mean, I think on one level, right, it is true, and what comes to mind is the third Karmapa's Mahamudra aspiration prayer, and I would suggest maybe taking a look at that, because you know, his third Karmapa's clarity on, and he does this, like, it's kind of like poetic device. He's like, it is like this, it is not like this, it is like this, it is not like that. And there's a specific line in there, and if I had it on my desktop, I would screen share it, but I don't. About, you know, its simplicity, right? And so yes, you know, this, I think this is why we have this big kind of distinction between Hatha Yoga and Mahamudra. So Mahamudra offers us this very compassionate, somewhat gradual path of training in shamatha and then training in vipassana, right? Lakton in particular, and then merging the two, and then, you know, then being able to experience directly Mahamudra. Now that's not really the way the mind necessarily works, because the mind is not, you know, a super linear kind of thing. But as a path, I think that what we could say is that on average, the skill of that path leads people very accurately or reasonably to be able to realize Mahamudra. Hatha Yoga, on the other hand, is a little bit more like at times sudden, and a lot more, I think you could even say a lot more intuitive, in the sense that one just kind of rests and stops, right? And then rests into direct awareness. And given how it tends to be introduced often, but not all the time, it's generally you know, introduced to people who have experience in meditation. So I don't think you need to go through the shamatha, you know, training as much. But why I bring this up is because it's this simplicity piece of just resting very freely and naturally into the, you know, experience of mind will afford us a particular kind of experience. And it's not just one experience, an experience. And from there, it becomes incumbent upon us to train in remaining present and open and delicate, right? Kind of a little bit like, to foster a sense of open, caring, loving, nurturing intimacy with our practice. So that when we have, so resting into what's arising and very gently, lovingly, in a very relaxed fashion, not doing anything, just continue to rest presently with that. Because what we will often do is we'll have an experience. And I remember doing this a lot. Have an experience and be like, oh, I had an experience, like, and then it's like, okay, let me like get up and go to the bookshelf and like look at what that was. Like, what that was clear, that was clarity, and just to continue to let this thing develop over time. I would also suggest that part of a much more kind of effective integration practice is bringing it off the cushion, right? And learning how to be able to bring this, and it's really kind of learning from our own trial and error, right? Like going to the post office, right? And where I live, depending on the time of day, there can be like a super long line, and so it's either like, oh boy, not a long line, I don't have time for this, or oh, long line, here I'm going to rest in the nature of mind, having a difficult experience, perhaps, a difficult, it could be any kind of difficult experience, and then resting into the experience of that and understanding the nature of mind within that context. Having a wonderful experience, somebody saying, oh my gosh, and I do mean this, Gendon, I rejoice in the fact that you are an ordained member of Sangha, and so I'm saying that with like, heartfelt, loving kindness to you. But then you may receive that and be like, check this out. Exactly. And so resting into the nature, that experience that you had, right? And to quote, check it against that. So to check it against inflation, to check it against, deflation, a sense of deflation. This is where, like, kind of going back to Cha, the different kinds of demons that exist, the demon of inflation, the demon of exaltation, etc., all kind of, intersect very well with this. So I don't know if that's helpful, but the more that we kind of blend it in over and over and over again, my kids, they're home, this week, and they're sweet and I love them. And my wife is super busy, and at times I can be too. And so, making sure that we're both available to them, appropriately, and holding space for them means we have a lot of feelings from time to time. And so bringing that, so whatever it is, there's really no, even just looking at the news, with Ukraine. Yes, yeah, Travis.
I think this is kind of just an extension of what you were just talking about, but I was thinking of the line in that Mahamudra aspiration prayer that's like, it cannot be said that it's this, but it is not this. And that's like this experience, I was recalling meditation experience or just consciousness experience where it's like Gendon was saying, it's like, oh, I think this might be it. And then it's like, oh wait. And then that you get into that trap of like, you can't say, oh yeah, that was it. But then it's like, oh wait, I'm judging that now. But wait, I can't say that judging that is not it either. And then it gets into this like infinite little like flickering back and forth thing, and it's like, and then I'm like, oh, well, when I'm, when I'm really enlightened, I won't be kind of going back and forth in this kind of way. And then I'm like, wait, but I can't say this is not it. So it's this trippy little like loop, that, yeah, that I was, that I recall as you were talking, that it's like, oh, at some point does that go away? But then, no, you can't like judge that. So it's, yeah, I don't know. I wanted to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in a way, like it's a process of refinement, right? And it's refinement born out of experience. Right? And so we'll get a little tossed about this way and that. And the most important thing is to not take ourselves seriously. Because that can be really helpful. In fact, it's when we take ourselves seriously that we'll kind of end up in this it could be like an eddy for a while where we're just kind of like hanging out there, because I got it, rather than just letting the whole thing continue to go. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just reading this question. Yeah, be careful not to explain away everything that happened here, because you start to tell a story. Yes, yeah, absolutely, MJ. Like the irony, right, is like, we just read that it's not in the intellect. Can't trust the intellect, and then we rely almost instantaneously on the intellect when a particular experience happens. Yeah, Melissa.
Travis and Gian, then in terms of what you're talking about, the flight of the Garuda, besides laying out an Ati view, talks a lot about not attaching to meditation experience. And so I think it begins to be a real slippery slope. And that's a lot of what I was doing. I got really irritated last week because I felt like, leave me alone, I'm in a nice cocoon, And when my mind does that, start attaching and saying, well, is this, right? That can be an inspiration to look directly, just like the Mahamudra instructions, look directly at that thought, like any thought, and rest your mind there, because there is this danger of attaching to meditation experiences at all different levels. I'm talking at a basic level for myself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I had one of my teachers pointed out to me yesterday, let go of this thing. We were talking about. Very good, let it go. Forget it. And so, again, the less we can kind of take the experience that we're having so dramatically seriously, and just, I think it was last year or the year before, like I had used this kind of metaphor, which just kind of came to me in the moment, but which I still really like imagine yourself as a bird in a tree or something, as a meditator, and practice like that you're just watching, right? You're not owning, you're not, pontificating on the experience had, just very naturally letting yourself have this experience, and don't be attached. Yeah, pain.
What you're talking about, having experiences and not getting attached to them. I don't have kids myself yet, but I've had young cousins and things around, and I've had children around at times. And maybe you as a parent can tell me if this works. But you know how like a kid will go and they'll get real into something, they'll be super into it for like 10 minutes, and then it's just they drop it, and then they go on to something else, and then that's the center of the universe, and they just drop it, and they just sort of like they're just playing the whole time, but there's a seriousness, like they're sincerely playing, they're really into it, but they're not taking it like serious in the way that we think of serious, like where you get wrinkles like I've done. So, Is there something there?
Yeah, thank you. There is, in a way, Ani Zangmo once told me, in the future, when you look for teachers, look for teachers who are childlike. And I once told that to someone and they were like, that's the worst advice. Like, I don't want like an immature teacher. And like, that's not the point, right? It's not like, some kind of immature thing, but it's really, somebody who's not taking everything so seriously, like including time and themselves, right? And it's not because we shouldn't take ourselves seriously, but at some point we're going to have to not do that. That's the hard piece too, is like at some point we have to confront this this sense of self, and that's not an easy thing. So playing into our practice, just being present while we go through life, while we go through life well or not well, playing, being open and present, and then also not putting ourselves in these boxes of self-judgment as practitioners when our practice doesn't go well, right? And just, relegating ourselves to a place of self-punishment. That's an important thing too. So if there aren't any other questions, could we do like a real kind of micro sit? Cool. Yeah, awesome. So, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We've got a couple minutes left. But if we don't, allow yourself to rest as freely as possible. And if possible, try and turn this into a game. Like, how quickly can I just settle and relax into the natural state, right? Without work, without force or effort. Just allow yourself to become a being of natural, perfect space. Right. We'll do this for 2 minutes. And allow yourself to just remain in this place of spaciousness, dedicating any merit from this session to all beings who are suffering today, all beings who have died in the past week, may all beings who are passing through the bardo be able to recognize their mind as vast, primordially pure space. May the hearts of all beings who are suffer be able to be massaged by loving kindness. May all suffering and fear and anxiety and horror in the world in this moment be able to be effectively purified. May the minds of everyone here be blessed. May your practice be deep and fruitful. Take good care of yourselves. Be well. And yeah, I'll see you soon.